Hey guys, it's Courtney. I'm here with a design team project for the May 2019 Club La La Land kit. I'm going to quickly show you the contents of the kit. We get two stamp sets and these are both red rubber. We have this is the Cured Yet. It has little pigs. One is in a bed, one has crutches, one has an IV. And then we have Dr. Marcy along with several different sentiments that you can use. Also, we have dies that come with the set, and we have this heartbeat monitor type thing. We have a pill bottle, and we have the Get Well Soon. Here's a card that I used with the card kit using the Get Well Soon die as well as that heartbeat die. I can't remember the name of it offhand. So we're going to start another project here, and I wanted to use as much of the kit as I possibly could. So I'm starting off by stamping out my images, and I'm using my Misty here, and I did not even cut these apart yet, but I don't need to at this point. I am stamping with Blackout ink by Ink on 3 onto a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. I'm going to fussy cut the images out, so I'm not too worried about the way they're stamped or the position of the stamping at this point. So I'm going to speed up the coloring a little bit because it obviously took me a little bit of time. I'm going to start with Marcy here, and as always, I am starting off with my lightest color to map out my darkest areas, and then I'll move on to the darkest color and kind of work my way down from there. Her shadowing on her face will be underneath where her hair is hanging over her face, underneath her little chin, on the bottom portion of her hands. Also where her little lab coat is hanging over her legs would cast a shadow, and on the inside of her legs, the light, I guess, would be cast on the outer portion. So next I'm moving on to the E11. Now normally I use a 4-color blend, but because there is so much room on her face and I really wanted to get a lot of contrast, I ended up using 5 different colors for her. I'm also adding 2 little flick lines coming up for her nose just to give her nose a little shape. Also added 2 little flick lines for her little kneecaps as well as where her ankles, I guess, would be. There is a little bit of an indentation in the illustration itself. I just kind of use that to add a little bit more shape to them. Once the skin was done, I'm going to go on to her hair, and I wanted her hair to be black. So this is going to look a little weird, but I'm starting off with the B18. And I am just laying this down where my darkest areas will be, which will be where her hair is parted, where it is tucked behind her ear, where her little ponytail is kind of coming out from behind her face, and on the tip of her ponytail, as well as the bangs as well. Then I'm going to go in with my black marker, and I'm pretty much going over the very darkest areas, but not covering up all of that blue that we laid down. But this will be, the shadows would be in the same area. My flick lines are going to be in the same shape of her hair. So her ponytail is kind of wavy, so my flicks will kind of be curved as well to go along with the shape of her hair. Next, moving on to the C7, and I'm just going to extend that black out a little bit further. Now, this is pretty much where I'm going to be covering up that blue. If a little bit is showing through, I'm not too worried about it. The blue just adds a little bit extra to it. There's always an undertone, and this will kind of add that undertone for you. You don't want to extend it out too far where your C3 or anything is going to be. Otherwise, it's just going to look like blue hair. So just filling in those highlight areas with that C3 and leaving just a little bit of white space, especially on her bangs where most of the light would be casting, I guess. Going to use some C markers for her lab coat as well. So I'm going in with the C5 as my darkest color, creating a shadow on either side of her, and also where she's holding her little clipboard, that would cast a shadow onto her coat, where her collar, I guess it would be, would also cast a shadow, as well as her pockets. For her shoes, I'm just adding a little bit of shading on either side and keeping a center highlight. Going to extend those areas out a little bit further with the C3, and then finally moving on to the C1, which will be my lightest color. And I'm leaving some white space here because I still want this to appear to be white, both her coat and her shoes, to get rid of those flick lines to make it a little bit more of a seamless blend. I don't necessarily want to see any texture in this. I'm going to quickly go over those white areas with my colorless blender, and that will kind of smooth out some of those flick lines that we had created. For her clipboard, I'm going to bring in some E30 markers, again starting off with my lightest color to map out the darkest areas. Being the clipboard is kind of bent out a little bit, I guess you could say, the shading would be off to the left-hand side and underneath where she's holding it. So extending that out each time with the midtones and just leaving the very right side for the highlight color. For the clip part of the clipboard itself, I'm just going to go in with a solid color, not worried about shading for that. Now for her headband and for her dress, I'm going to be using some reds here. So as always, going in with my lightest color first. And you want to be super careful with reds. I typically wait to do my reds last because they can bleed sometimes, and they're very hard to take up. So you want to be super careful, and you don't want to oversaturate the paper here because if the reds bleed, they're nearly impossible to get rid of with your colorless blender. So you don't want to be adding too much ink here. You just want to be adding enough to get a good blend. So the shading is going to be on either side of her little headband and where her coat is hanging over the rest of her dress, and also having a shadow where her clipboard is hanging over the bottom portion of her dress as well. So once she was colored, we're going to go ahead and move on to these other little pigs, or these other little characters, I should say. We're going to start off with the one in the bed, and I'm going to bring back out my C markers because I want the blanket and the mattress and the pillow to appear white. So I'm adding some shading where the blanket is folded, and towards the bottom where it would be laying against the floor, it's kind of a wavy line there. So that would indicate that it's kind of gathered or pleated, kind of. So I'm just going to create some little triangles there and then blend those out each time, just making them a little bit wider and a little bit longer each time. And this will make it look as if it's kind of gathered, or I don't want to say pleated, but you guys know what I mean. Same thing for the pillow on all four corners. It's kind of gathered up there. Also using the same color combination for the little tissues. And then again, once that was all the C markers were down, I'm going to quickly go over the white areas with my colorless blender to get rid of those flick lines to make it more of a seamless blend. Now for the bed itself, I'm going to bring in the E30 markers again, and you'll see here that I pretty much stuck to the same color combination throughout the entire card. I used my E30s, my C markers, and that red combination that we used for her dress. So everything will kind of match together. So for the bed frame, I'm going to concentrate my shading being off to the left-hand side, being it's kind of tilted a little bit, or it's not a completely straight anyway. And then just blending that out each time with going back down to that E30 marker. Now for him or her, I'm going to use a R00 as my lightest color, which is a really, really pale pink. Mapping out the darkest areas again, and then you'll see my darkest color is my R05. And this is pretty red. It's not, well, I don't want to say it's red, but it's pretty close to red. But I'm using it very sparingly, and I'm only using this in the very darkest areas. And then once you see I start blending this out with the R02 and R01, you'll see that it definitely tones down a lot. So this will only be in the very darkest areas. So don't be afraid to use that scary dark color. You'll see here, once this is done, I get a smooth blend, and you can't even tell that I used almost red on this little pig. So I ended up coloring all three of the pigs with the same color combination, so I'm not going to bother to show you the coloring of all three of them. But I went back to that red combination that we used for Marcy's dress, and I'm going to color this little I can't think, I guess it's a hot pack or a cool pack on top of his head and the little tissue box, being careful not to oversaturate the paper to avoid any bleeding, but using the same color combination for that as well. I will go ahead and color the rest of the pigs again, like I said, with the same color combination, so I'm not going to bore you with that, but I did use that R05 for all three of them. For this little crutch here, I'm going to bring back out those R30 markers, but I'm only using 2 of them here, or maybe I used 3 of them. Yeah, I used 3 of them. But it's such a teeny tiny area that I'm not too concerned with too much shading there. For his little sling, I'm going to bring out those C markers again to make this appear white. Just going to use a skin tone for the Band-Aid, not doing any shading there. For the IV that this little girl is holding, I am going to bring out some C markers, but again, doing very minimal shading here. There's not a whole lot of room. You could probably just go in with one single color and be fine. For the wheels, I am going to color these in solid as well with just the black marker. For her little dress, I am going to bring out that red combination again. Shading is going to be on the bottom portion of her sleeves where it meets the rest of her dress and on either side of her, but I am leaving just a little bit of a highlight on the very edge of her dress on either side, just so that I don't have 2 of the darkest areas directly next to one another. This will kind of differentiate between her sleeves and the rest of her dress, but leaving a center highlight as well for her dress. She's kind of round, as you can see, so I like to keep a strong center highlight for any round object. So once, oh, their little hooves there, I couldn't think of what color they were, so I just used a C marker to color these in solid. I didn't do any shading for these. Next, I'm going to fix some coloring errors or messiness, I should say, with my white gel pen, especially areas that I'm not necessarily able to fix, and also filling in the whites back in her eyes and adding a few reflections here and there. I also wanted to add a little bit of interest to her dress as well as the little pig's dress. So I am just adding little polka dots with my gel pen. Now, if you have a problem getting your gel pen to kind of flow the way it's supposed to, just kind of write a little bit on the tip of your finger, and that will warm up the tip of the gel pen and make that ink flow out a little bit better. So once all of my coloring was finally done, I went ahead and fussy cut this, and we're going to move on to the coloring of some of the dyes that come in the kit as well. So I went ahead and die cut 2 of the pill bottles, 2 of these little heartbeat things, and all of the hearts that go along inside the pill bottles. I'm going to spread a little bit of Tombow Mono Multi Glue on the back of each of the die cuts and let that dry. Once it's dry, it's temporary adhesive. So once it's dry, I'll stick this down to my cardstock, and this is just a scrap piece of paper, and this makes my coloring a little bit easier. That way I don't have to go chasing my die cuts. So again, I'm going to kind of stick to the same color combinations that I've been using throughout the entire card. For the little pill bottles, I'm going to be using the E30 markers. And again, these are going to be round objects. So I'm going to concentrate my shading being on either side, keeping a very strong center highlight. And this is going to look a little bit funny when I'm coloring, especially on camera, because I'm going off the die cut and onto that scrap piece of paper so much. It's going to look really, really messy. Don't get discouraged. Once you're done and you peel the card or the little die cut pieces off, you'll notice that you have a good blend and everything came out good. But right now it looks really, really messy. So using that E30 just for that center highlight, and for the lids and the label, I guess it would be, of the little pill bottles, I'm going to bring out that C3 and C1, just doing a little bit of shading on either side. Again, this is part of the pill bottle, so it's going to be considered a round object. So I want to leave the very center white and just add a little bit of shading on either side. Any white object, remember, does have shading to it, does have shadows. For the little heartbeat, I was going to do some shading on this, but it's it's so intricate and I wouldn't even be sure where I would put my shading. So I ended up coloring this in solid with the C3 just to make it match the rest of my card. And you can see that I'm using just the side of my nib here, the brush nib, I find it easiest, and coloring that in solid. And it did shift around a little bit just because it is more of an intricate die and I don't have a whole lot of adhesive on the back of it, but I just held it with one hand and colored with the other and I didn't have too much of an issue. Next, we'll move on to the coloring of the hearts. And again, using that same red combination for the larger hearts, I am going to just add some shading to the left-hand side. Honestly, I just picked a side. It doesn't necessarily matter, but I'm using the real dark color off to the left and then kind of fading out to the right-hand side. For the smaller hearts, I will use the same color combination, but because these smaller hearts are part of the pill bottle, which is a round object, I'm going to want a center highlight for those. So I'm going to cover up the entire thing with my lightest color to get the paper saturated. This will make my colors blend a little bit easier. Then go in with the darkest color, just a teeny tiny bit on either side of the heart, and then just blend that out a little bit each time. Again, leaving a pretty small, pretty large center highlight to make this appear as if it is a round object once everything is put together. So once all of that was done, I finished fussy cutting Marcy and all my little pigs and naturally peeled off all of my die cuts from my scrap piece of paper and kind of arranged them on my long card here to kind of see how I was going to want them. Now you can see that maybe my adhesive wasn't completely dry before I flipped them on my scrap piece and I had a little bit of trouble peeling those off. So you'll just want to make sure that that Tombow Mono Multi Glue is completely dry before you stick those down before you do your coloring. So initially I was going to use both of these little heartbeats and I just didn't have enough room. I had enough room if I was going to skip a sentiment, but I didn't want to skip a sentiment. So I'm going to start by adhering my little heartbeat there, my one heartbeat, off to the left-hand side. And I am going to stick this down with my Tombow Mono Multi Glue. I have it sitting on my desk. And oh, here I kept this in the video because I thought it was funny. I kept feeling something inside my sleeve poking around. And I reached in and it was a piece of foam tape. Don't know how it got there. Like I said, I track all this stuff everywhere. So going to go ahead and stick down this heartbeat off to the left-hand side. You can use any adhesive here. You can even use like a double-sided adhesive before you run this through your die cutting machine. But that if you're going to color it, I don't recommend that. You may have some issues with that. Going to add a little bit of adhesive to the middle of that little heart and stick down my colored heart inside of there. And then I will arrange all of my other elements from the card. So I'm going to have Marcy off to the right just a little bit, two of the little pigs off to the left of her. I'm going to stack up two of the pill bottles just to make sure that I can fit both of them and everything is kind of popped up at an even level, I guess. Before I adhere all of my characters here, because they hang off the card a little bit, I want to make sure that I adhere my card panel down to my card base. So I'm going to adhere this flat because I feel like I'm going to probably have enough dimension with all of my characters that I don't want to add any more with fun foam or anything. So I'm going to use my Scotch foam tape to adhere Marcy and the three little pigs, which I just realized they're three little pigs, the way that I had kind of planned out. And then for my pill bottle, I'm going to add the first one with my Tombow Mono Multi Glue. So the first one is going to be laying flat against the card panel. And this is already pretty much put together already. And then for the second one, I'm going to pop this up with my Scotch foam tape. And what I did for this is I added a little bit, when I added the Scotch foam tape, I just added it a little bit longer, or I cut it a little bit longer than what I actually needed for the pill bottle. That way when I add the lid to it, it will still be popped up but laying flat against the pill bottle, if that makes any sense to you guys at all. So I added my little heart to the center, and you can see having that center highlight really goes along with the rest of the pill bottle, making it appear as if it is a round object. So once all of my characters and my little pill bottles were adhered down to my card panel, we're going to move on to the sentiment, which I didn't leave myself a whole lot of room for. So I'm going to add a sentiment strip. Because I want all of my reds to match, I'm going to take a scrap piece of paper and use that R46, which is one of the midtones, and just scribble that onto basically just a strip of the scrap paper. Going to treat that with my anti-static tool and then go ahead and stamp my sentiment with Versamark ink. Sprinkle on some white embossing powder and go ahead and heat set that. And then cut that down into a strip just slightly larger than the sentiment itself, being I don't have a whole lot of room for it. There was a couple of areas that I didn't really color enough, I guess you could say. So I did have to very carefully bring back in that R46 to touch up some of those areas. And I've heard that embossed areas can ruin your Copics or damage them. So just be careful if you do color it after the fact that you don't go over that embossed area. So once that was done, I'm going to take another skinny little strip of Scotch foam tape and adhere this kind of at an angle in the top right hand corner, being I really don't have much room to adhere this anywhere. And then I'm going to add a little bit of sparkle. So I'm taking my Spectrum Noir sparkle pen and adding some sparkle to the inside of the hearts on the pill bottle, as well as that little heartbeat there. And then just kind of some random areas, her dress and her headband. And then to add extra dimension, I am going to add some glossy accents to the hearts, all three of the hearts. And you'll just want to make sure that you let this dry for a good hour before you go handling the card, because it does take some time to dry. Right now it looks a little bit cloudy, but it does dry completely clear. But that is the card for today, guys. Thanks a lot for stopping by and have a great day. Bye.